Hello, I just wanted to do a quick little tutorial of sort, not completely tutorial, more explanation of a few different ways to finish or hem your garment or covering, whatever it is that you're working on, even curtains, what have you. Most commonly, people use their sergers anymore. If you have one, sometimes you don't have one. And I want to show you what a few of these different things look like. When I'm sewing head coverings, I know quite often people will ask me what I'm talking about when I say a narrow rolled hem or a napkin edge type hem and so forth. And I thought this would also be a good way so people can see that and understand the difference. Right here, this is done on the serger. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of a ridge, and it's what it's called a narrow rolled hem. Your sergers can do that. Even the old sergers can. Usually you'll have to actually take off your throat plate with an old serger. If you have a newer one like this one is, you can actually switch between that and go ahead and just change settings, which is really, really nice. But that right there is your standard serger. Those are the two things that you switch between. That's what I mean. It's your narrow rolled hem, and that's just your standard overlock stitch that you see finishing the edge of a garment on the inside usually. This is not really considered finished, whereas this is. You can see that looks a whole lot neater. Let me flip this. This is kind of the wrong side. This edge here is again your overlock. I did that spaced pretty closely, and that's one thing I wanted to point out is you can change your spacing on your stitches if something is a very bad raveling type of a fabric, or just plain just looks better, I think, if you got a little closer spacing. Obviously it takes more thread if you do that than spacing something like this. It's just kind of up to you. All of this stuff here is done using the 3-thread sewing. You can actually use 4-thread sewing on your serger too. But this right here has not been turned. That's an unfinished edge. This is a finished narrow rolled hem edge, or you might, some people call it the napkin edge. This right here is a double turned hem that is done on a sewing machine. That is a very traditional hem. On the back side you can see, you just see your sewing line. Of course, typically people don't sew with black thread on white fabric, but the point is to show you so you can see it. Normally that would blend in a lot better. Very important that as you turn these things that you have a seam gauge to help measure and make sure that you're turning, very evenly, or things will pucker and just not lay right. That right there is a double turn. This right here has been finished and then turned once. So you see that it's been sewn with a sewing machine, but on the right side you only see just the sewing machine stitching line. On the inside you would see a serged edge and the sewing stitch line. The purpose of doing it that way is just, it's kind of a little bit easier, I suppose. I think it can also lay a little bit better than a double turn hem, because double turn, that gets just a little bit thicker and a little bit more bulky. In some things, like maybe a curtain, that can be a good thing. It can kind of give body to a garment or a curtain or what have you. But there's some things that you want them to flow better, so a single turn can be better. But if you only turn that once, obviously you would have this little raw edge here, which is the purpose of going ahead and serging it. An alternative, if you don't have a serger, is your pinking shears. I was talking about those in a previous video. Pinking shears. These right here. Very, very useful. I know they're an old-fashioned tool, but I love them. All you have to do is just cut the edge and then turn it and hem it with your sewing machine. This right here is a blind hem edge. This is the wrong side of the fabric, and all you see on the right side are just these little spaced stitches. And you can actually, if you have, like my needle can move right and left, you can actually get that so these little stitches are barely visible. And typically that's going to change a little bit depending on your fabric type, how thick your fabric is, and whether it's polyester or cotton and so forth. so you may need to find a little bit of adjustment with right and left to get that truly perfect. But you can get that to where even with that black thread, you might only see just a teeny little dot. And that is really, really useful if you're trying to make something look nice and clean and professional. I have not mastered the hemming with a blind hemmer and doing curves. So usually this is only done on something that is straight, like the hemline of a dress or something like that. Definitely something that people also like to do with curtains. And on the wrong side of that, again, you need to either double turn that, pink the edge, or even serge the edge and then do your blind hem. The actual process of doing the blind hem is a little bit confusing at first, and that is something for another video. I know somebody asked me if I ever showed that recently, and I don't know if I ever showed that on camera, but I will attempt to do that if I haven't yet. When you're doing a blind hem, it's also helpful to have a blind hem foot, which is what's on my Bernina right now, and it's got this little piece here to help you guide and get it just perfect. Personally, I adore the Bernina's blind hem foot. The one that I used and had on my Singer was a lot less functional and didn't work quite as well, but it still worked. Just this one is just easy and it always comes out nice every time. But anyway, of course, there's the right side of both a regular just stitching and then the blind hem. And again, your narrow rolled hem, just a basic overlock that's spaced a little closer than average, a regular overlock that's got a normal wide spacing, and that's been stitched with the sewing machine. And then an old-fashioned double turn hem. A lot of times you'll see this on the tail of a shirt or on baby clothes. Sometimes people will call a baby hem, but usually it's only called baby hem if it's really, really tiny. A lot tinier than that. That's probably a little more than a 1/4 inch turned twice, so a total of a 1/2 inch. Baby hems are extremely tiny, like 1/8 and 1/8 inch maybe, and there's a little bit of a trick to do those. You start off with a wider edge and then you go through and then you trim that out and then turn it again, and that's kind of a way you can get that really, really tiny baby hem. I rarely do those, but they do look very nice if you're trying to sew your own head covering. I'm trying to think. One problem that people have with sewing head coverings is a lot of times the coverings, depending on what pattern or size or shape that you're going with, will have curves. And hemming curves certainly can be done, but it is very tough to do that perfectly neatly. And that's where things like your serger come in, and just making that so easy, because you can just run the edge of any shape or curve with that narrow rolled hem, and it's so easy. But you can do things like hemming those curves. You can run a little line with your regular sewing machine, a line of stitching, and then pull on the threads to make it pucker just a little bit, so that edge will turn just a little bit easier. One of my favorite tricks if you're trying to hem a curved edge on a head covering is using bias tape. You can either use purchased bias tape or you can make your own, but because bias tape has that stretch to it, all you have to do is go through and lay it on an edge. I don't have any laying right here, but let me see. Let's pretend for a second this is bias tape. This is just a strap of a head covering, but if you were just doing your bias tape, all you would have to do is just lay it to where those edges are together, and because of that stretch, it will go around the curves. You sew it together, and then you would turn and go the other way with it, turn it wrong side out. It essentially makes a facing, is what it does. If bias tape is used kind of as you're facing or in place of a facing, it is very helpful. I love using bias tape on necklines and things like that, because I actually hate facings. Facings work, they're functional, but they irritate me to death, especially on a neckline. So that's also a major trick that you can do, is use bias tape on hemming the necklines or any curve or what have you. I think that's all for this video. Have a blessed day.